Every notable sports Hall of Fame has its omissions. Just look at Pete Rose in baseball or Devin Hester in pro football if you want any evidence of this. And of course, wrestling Hall of Fames are no different. Even voters of the Wrestling Observers have yet to induct people like Curt Hennig, Arn Anderson, or CM Punk. But perhaps the most egregious examples of people not getting their moment in the sun comes with the WWE equivalent as, given the whole thing is decided by one man, it means that if he doesn't see the argument for you, then you're not going to get in. But what are the biggest examples of this? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today. So join us as we take a deep dive into snubbed wrestlers not in the WWE Hall of Fame. And as always, if we're going to start anywhere, we really should do so with one of the biggest examples of them all, and that's the fact that even now, 24 years after his death, Owen Hart still isn't in the Hall of Fame. Of course, there are reasons for this, with the main one being that Owen's widow Martha has been very vocal about not wanting WWE to use her late husband's likeness in any way, as she still holds them personally responsible for the accident which led to his demise. Not everyone in that family sees it that way though. No, Owen's own brother Brett has long been an advocate for his younger sibling getting his moment in the sun in New York. Still, even if he feels this way, it seems unlikely such an event will ever take place. That said, none of this takes away from the fact that, whether there or not, the King of Hearts absolutely had a Hall of Fame-worthy career, if for no other reason than his use of high-flying theatrics during the late 80s and early 90s helped to introduce a whole new audience of kids to the style. And then there's his excellent program with Brett, which spanned most of 1994, a program which gave us two bona fide 5-star classics at WrestleMania 10 and the following August SummerSlam respectively. On top of this, there are also the great runs he had in places such as Stampede and Japan, the latter of which saw him become a one-time IWGP Junior Heavyweight Champion. Sure, he may have never won a world title, but he did just about everything else which could be done in the ring. And with him inspiring a whole generation of talent which came after, including names such as Kevin Owens and another man we'll get to in a moment, his reputation remains strong to this day. So at least we can be thankful that, even if it's not coming as a result of him being an entrant into the WWE Hall of Fame, his legacy is once more being celebrated on screen in the form of All Elite Wrestling's annual Owen Hart Foundation tournament, a tournament which has been personally approved by Martha herself. And with that tournament taking place in Canada this year, it seems likely we'll see a certain Winnipeg-born roster member taking part in it. Of course, the very fact that he now works for the competition remains a large part of the reason why Chris Jericho still doesn't have his WWE Hall of Fame ring. Yes, it's more than likely that, given the stellar career he's had, if he was still working in New York, the Demo God would have already taken his place amongst the ranks of the greats by now. After all, in WWE alone, he's a 6-time world champion, with one of those being his run as the first ever undisputed champion. Then there are the endless classic bouts he's had not just in Vince McMahon's promotion, but also in the likes of WCW and ECW too. Really, if we're ranking all of the people we're discussing today based on who was the best in the ring, Y2J would be right amongst the top of the list. But despite being a man who's managed to keep reinventing himself throughout his career in order to always remain relevant, one reinvention he's yet to undergo is becoming a WWE Hall of Famer. And as we said a moment ago, with him now working for AEW, it seems unlikely this'll happen anytime soon. Sure, there's always the possibility that either the two companies will come to a deal which lets Jericho be honored, or alternatively, Chris will have one more run in New York before his time is up. But to be perfectly honest, with relations between the promotions seeming worse now than they ever have been, and with the Ocho apparently being under a pretty long-term contract down in Jacksonville, it seems more likely he'll be going into any Hall of Fame Tony Khan created first at this rate. And he's not the only person who's likely being blocked from getting a very well-deserved moment on the podium by virtue of having a job with AEW, because even if he is an undeniable legend, Christian Cage's ongoing role on Dynamite means we don't see him joining his best friend Edge there in the immediate future. Of course, the idea that a 2-time world champion, 4-time intercontinental champion, and 9-time tag team champion wouldn't be allowed to get his roses just because he works for another company might seem ridiculous to an outsider, but then that's wrestling for you. We just hope this can be rectified at some point in the future though, because throughout his lengthy career, Christian has proven to be the ultimate utility player for whoever he's been with at the time, someone who can work equally as well as a singles or tag act, mid-carder or main eventer, or even as a manager. Hell, you could argue that out of all 6 men who were involved in those now iconic tables, ladders, and chairs bouts during the turn of the millennium, he was the best actual wrestler of the bunch. And the fact he's still going strong as he is today, working with young up-and-comers like Jungle Boy and Wardlow, is just a further testament to his overall longevity. Really then, it feels like it should just be a matter of time before it happens for him. After all, Randy Savage and The Ultimate Warrior both ended up in the Hall of Fame after years of being persona non grata within WWE, so anything is possible. And this idea that anything is possible has only been further shown in recent years by the fact D-Generation X got an induction as a group in 2019, meaning a certain groundbreaking female was finally honored, sort of. Yes, we say sort of, because even if she is technically now a part of WWE's hallowed halls, Chyna is still yet to get the solo induction she deserves. Need any evidence as to why she's earned her spot there? Just look at the run she had during the turn of the millennium where, not only did she break down barriers by becoming the first woman in WWE to regularly mix it up with the men, but she even became the first, and to date only, woman to win a men's singles title under their banner. That's right, when the 9th Wonder of the World pinned Jeff Jarrett on October 17th, 1999's No Mercy pay-per-view to become Intercontinental Champion, she secured her place in the history books forevermore. But it's far more than just one title win which should secure her a solo spot in the Hall of Fame, because aside from that, she was also involved in some of the most memorable angles of her era, such as her runs with Mark Henry and Eddie Guerrero. Then, as if this wasn't enough, there's the fact that as a powerhouse woman who could get over with every type of fan, she served as the template for future stars like Beth Phoenix and Awesome Kong. And if you're a fan of Rhea Ripley's current run as the Eradicator over on Raw, you can thank Chyna for paving the way for her. Sadly though, for a long time, heavy drug addiction and a decision to join the adult entertainment industry meant WWE didn't want to put Chyna amongst their legends officially. Thankfully though, that attitude seems to have softened in recent years, meaning it's now likely only a matter of time until she gets the moment she deserves. Not that she'll be able to personally enjoy it, however, because she tragically died in 2016. And this put her in the same category as another notable Hall of Fame snub then, as even if Bam Bam Bigelow does get his moment in the future, he won't be around to show up for it in person. Yes, it's one of the greatest injustices in wrestling that the Beast from the East never got his due before he tragically passed away of a drug overdose in 2007. And the reason for this is that, outside of maybe Vader, it's hard to think of a more agile and athletic big man WWE ever had under their employ. Really, who else his size was busting out moonsaults in the late 80s and early 90s? And it's not just his athleticism which earns him a spot where he belongs either. No, it's the fact that at WrestleMania 11, he was able to carry a football player who'd never performed in the ring before through the main event of the biggest show of the year. Of course, if even that isn't somehow enough reason for Bam Bam to get his Hall of Fame ring, there's also his lengthy runs in places like ECW, WCW, and even over in Japan, the former of which saw him become a one-time world champion and one-time television champion, and the latter of which saw him get to hold the IWGP Tag Team Gold with Vader himself. Honestly, it's hard to think of another man or woman who's so underrated in modern fans' eyes. So let's just hope this changes in the near future, and WWE finally recognizes the error of their ways by putting him on the pedestal he belongs to be on. But even if this does take a while yet, Bam Bam's family can at least rest easy in the knowledge that he's not the only person of his era who's still waiting for his big moment. No, as it happens, another of his 80s and 90s peers is also yet to receive his Hall of Fame induction. Who are we talking about here? Why, Sid, of course. Yes, he's a man who, during his time in New York alone, not only held the WWF title on 2 separate occasions, but also main evented WrestleMania twice. That's right, after taking on Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 8, and even unintentionally becoming the first man to kick out of the leg drop of doom, Sid disappeared from Vince McMahon's promotion for a while, only to return again in time for WrestleMania 13, where he once again main evented, this time against The Undertaker. Were either of these matches great? No, but that's besides the point. The point is that for a brief period back then, Sid was over in a huge way. And if you don't believe us, just look at the reaction he gets when he comes out to the ring to take on the then top babyface Shawn Michaels at Survivor Series 1996. But of course, it's not just his time in New York which should earn Sid a Hall of Fame ring. No, it's also his time in WCW, where he became a 2-time World Heavyweight Champion, and even briefly a member of the Four Horsemen. And he's not the only former Horseman who deserves a place in the Hall of Fame. No, there's another notable member who's yet to be inducted, and with his groundbreaking loose cannon character, Brian Pillman was able to get one over on pretty much the entire wrestling industry back in the 90s. Yes, in an era where kayfabe was well and truly dead, no one was able to blur the lines of reality and fiction more than this Cincinnati native. And that's because at points, even his peers didn't know what was going on with him, which was exactly how he famously managed to get Eric Bischoff to give him a legitimate release in 1996 so he could go over to WWF and get an even bigger money contract there. Then once he was there, his boundary-pushing tendencies went even further when on one now infamous episode of Raw, he pulled out a gun on live TV, almost getting the show kicked off the network in the process. But none of that should suggest his character work is the only reason he deserves a Hall of Fame induction, because the reality is, prior to his ankle injury, Pillman was one of the best actual wrestlers in the world too. In fact, during his time in both WCW and Stampede, he gained the nickname Flyin' Brian on account of his, at the time, groundbreaking aerial offense. Really then, it's no surprise he served as such a huge inspiration to many who came after him. Even to this day, in fact, people are trying to ape both his in-ring work and his fourth-wall shattering character segments constantly, something which could be seen as recently as MJF's walkout of AEW in 2022. And with him in many ways being more relevant now than ever because of this, there's no time for WWE to waste in putting him amongst their legends forevermore. Hell, it's not like they don't have the perfect person to induct him on their payroll in the form of his former Hollywood Blondes tag team partner, Stone Cold Steve Austin. But Brian Pillman might not be the only person Stone Cold feels like an obvious choice for when it comes to introducing a big-time Hall of Fame inductee. And that's because one of the industry's biggest ever stars, and arguably Austin's greatest in-ring rival, still hasn't gotten his moment yet. Who are we talking about this time? Why, who else but The Rock? Yes, it might seem strange to think that Dwayne Johnson, the highest grossing actor in all of Hollywood and former WWE star, isn't in their Hall of Fame yet. But when you take a second to think about it, there's actually a good reason for this. Basically, it all boils down to headline acts. After all, every year Vince McMahon likes to balance out his inductees with a list which includes lower card talents and main event stars. And that's why each time WrestleMania season comes around, you get at least one highest level star there, such as Steve Austin, Hulk Hogan, or The Undertaker. In recent times, however, that pool of top level guys has been growing smaller and smaller, as by this point, most of them are already in. So with that in mind, it seems like the company are still saving the Great One as their ultimate ace in the hole for a time when they really need it. Of course, it also has to do with The Rock's availability too though, as with a Hollywood career and ownership of the XFL to juggle, he's clearly a very busy man. But when the stars do finally align and his moment comes, there won't be a single person who will be disputing whether or not he deserves to be there, because as a 10-time world champion, 1-time Royal Rumble winner, 5-time WrestleMania main eventer, and at points the man carrying WWF on his back, he's earned a spot on the Mount Rushmore of the industry. The only question left is, will it happen before or after his seemingly inevitable match with Roman Reigns? If we were taking bets, we'd probably go with the latter option, because we imagine he'd want to formally hang up his boots once and for all before he accepts his Hall of Fame ring. And with it still being very possible that bout could take place at WrestleMania 40 next year, we wouldn't be surprised if, come the time of the 41st annual Showcase of the Immortals in 2025, he's not given the call and informed that finally, The Rock will be in his returning home. That said, he's not the only wrestler turned Hollywood star who's still waiting to be positioned among the all-time legends, because despite initially being pegged for an induction in 2020, Batista is currently waiting for his official moment on the podium to come. Sure, there were reasons why this couldn't happen that year, and with his schedule not allowing him to make it the following year either, it's meant the question of Dave's Hall of Fame status is still up in the air. But we're sure that'll change sooner rather than later, as in his in-ring career alone, he has achieved more than most by becoming a 6-time world champion, 2-time Royal Rumble winner, 2-time WrestleMania main eventer, and one of the most popular stars of his era. Seriously, at points he was even able to outshine other legends of his day like John Cena, Randy Orton, and Brock Lesnar. And after he was done with that, the animal found a whole new world to conquer again when he moved on to Hollywood, and there became a standout in movies like Blade Runner 2049, Dune, and the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy. And with the recent release of the third Guardians movie now meaning his profile is arguably higher than ever, it feels like a no-brainer Vince McMahon would want to bring him in to get his class ring as quickly as possible. Who knows, maybe it'll even happen next year in Philadelphia because, with his wrestling career now well and truly over following a retirement match against Triple H in 2019, it would serve as the perfect bow on his illustrious run and concrete proof that WWE really do consider him to be one of their all-time biggest and best acts. But while Dave may be one of the biggest the company has ever had in terms of star power, he's not the biggest in terms of size. No, outside of a few other notable names like Andre the Giant and the Great Khali, both of whom are in the Hall of Fame already themselves, perhaps the largest there's ever been is someone who's still waiting for his induction, and that's The Big Show. Yes, believe it or not, despite being a stalwart of New York from the Attitude Era onwards and a multiple-time world champion, Paul White has never actually made it into the Hall of Fame. Sure, you could argue the reason it hasn't happened for him over these last couple of years is because, like with Chris Jericho and Christian, he's since jumped ship and made a new home for himself over in AEW. But even before that happened, he should have been put in years prior anyway, because while he wasn't always treated like a top-level force, The Big Show was a constant hand WWE could call on to be slotted into pretty much any position they required. Need a dominating giant who could make short work of a main event babyface? He was your guy. Alternatively, need someone who could work with an up-and-coming act and help to establish them by putting them over? Paul White was right there. It didn't matter if it was singles competition or tag team action, comedy or drama, the South Carolinian was a renaissance man when it came to being what was needed of him. And because of this malleability then, it's meant that, no matter what happened before, he's always been able to come across like a very serious threat when necessary, something which has led to him winning the world title on no less than 7 occasions. And that's just in WWE because during his run in WCW prior to that, he won the World Heavyweight title a further 2 times, the first time of which came during his debut match with the company where he got the better of Hulk Hogan. So really, there's no excuse for the Big Two of North America to not work something out then and allow him his chance to have his moment, because if another decade passes without the Big Show in the WWE Hall of Fame, it'll be nothing short of a travesty. That said, it's arguably not as big of a travesty as the fact our next subject today still hasn't gotten inducted yet either, and that's because at various points he was pushed as the top babyface of both WWF and WCW. So with this kind of pedigree behind him, there's no way Lex Luger shouldn't be recognized. Sure, you could argue his run as WWF's next Hulk Hogan during the mid-90s was a complete disaster, but that didn't mean Lex didn't have a few notable moments while he was there anyway. After all, he was a co-winner of the 1994 Royal Rumble alongside Bret Hart, and his body slamming of Yokozuna aboard the USS Intrepid on July 4th, 1993 is still fondly remembered by fans of the time to this day. Still, if we're being perfectly honest, the case for him as a Hall of Famer mostly comes from his time in Atlanta, as it was there, during his first run, he briefly became a member of the Four Horsemen, then after that, went on to defeat Barry Windham to become the second ever WCW champion. But while this was impressive, his second run arguably saw him find even more success because there, he became a key enemy of the NWO. So much so that, a full 4 months before Sting did at Starrcade 1997, Luger was the first man to dethrone then world champion Hollywood Hogan on the August 4th episode of Nitro that year. And yes, he would lose this belt back only 5 days later, so it's not as if he had a lengthy run, but still, the very fact the total package had been given such an honor at all was a testament to how much his bosses were behind him and how much raw talent he had when he chose to apply himself. Of course, with him largely retiring from the ring in 2002, it's meant his body of work has in some ways been lost to time when it comes to more modern fans. So perhaps that explains why Vince McMahon is yet to add him to the hallowed halls of his legends. That said, if he has any sense, he'll rectify this before it's too late, because it's about time Lex got a Hall of Fame spot. But then the same could be said about each of the people we've discussed today too, because at the end of the day, they all deserve it. And with the arguments for them only getting stronger every year, there's no way they should remain snubbed for much longer.